We're here with Praveen Mohan, who's come all the way from India to share his remarkable research on the temples, the megaliths, and the ancient mysteries of that continent. I met up with Praveen in India for a short while while I was there for a few weeks in February. And also we met up at Stonehenge, and I showed him around Stonehenge and Avebury and other places. But today I want to ask him about some of his research and some of the remarkable sites that exist in India, which not many people know about. So we're going to get into it now. We're going to sort of blast through a few sites, a few ideas. I do recommend you check out his vast YouTube channel. And you can just search for it, Praveen Mohan, you'll find everything there. And just let me know what you think of his videos, because some of the stuff he's discovered is absolutely mind-blowing. So, Praveen, delighted to see you. Thanks for joining Megalithomania and having this interview at last. We've got together and actually sat down and done this. So, so can you just tell us a bit about, where you're based in India and kind of what drew you in to all these kind of temples and trying to understand their mysteries?
Well, first of
Oh
all,
no, bros, what happened to my AI?
Yes, for watching my work. I was born in India. I grew up in temples, so I grew up watching all these statues and carvings and
Bros, the AI.
which
No, what? Why?
early training, basically.
Why is this happening?
And I was very curious about what was the meaning behind all these
What? Come
carvings.
on, man, don't do this
And
to
they
me.
have some very interesting rituals, There were statues of various gods, and there were separate rituals that you had to perform in front of each statue. It's very interesting. For example, one of the statues we used to call as a deaf god. So this is called Chandigeswara in India, and it's very interesting because he's called the deaf god in India, and
Why?
when people
Like,
went
why?
near the statue, right?
Did they change
So
the code?
I don't know how much of your viewers know about Hinduism, but in a Hindu temple,
Why,
an ancient
man?
Hindu temple, you have hundreds of gods.
Like,
It's
there's
very
just,
polytheistic. So you
there's
have
just like the
hundreds of
smallest
gods.
things in life that make
One
me
god
happy,
is
and
the sun, the other
when
god
they
is
like
the
take
god
it
of
away from
money,
you,
etc. And then there's one god that's called the deaf god. So when people went near that deaf god, whatever you do, it's not going to reach him. So you kind of had to clap your hand or like snap your fingers to get his attention. And we see this is common knowledge in India. So people do all sorts of, like, in front of Ganesha or the elephant god, people kind of did squats in front of the elephant god. They would hold their ears like this, and they would do squats, literally, like you had to do it like 10 times before the elephant god. And this is very interesting, and it really catches your attention. Why are all these people coming to the temple? And you see some guys snapping their fingers in front of the statue, some guys doing the squats, some guys, doing strange rituals. And I wanted to really decode the meaning behind all these carvings and statues and rituals.
That's fascinating, because I remember when I went there, I went to the Pashki temple, and I think it's
The
called
Pakshi temple.
the Pakshi, and this is not too far from Bangalore. We saw the giant kind of bull statue, which was an incredible megalithic monument. But when I went there, it was so busy. There was hundreds of people there, and they were all there, and it felt like they were there for a sacred reason. And it was packed, and it was, I know some days that happens, but it makes me realise as well, and following on from what you're saying, these temples are alive. They're still active, they're still being used. It's almost like it's never changed since they were built.
And this is why I say, especially to your viewers, come to India, right? Because I know we have great megalithic structures. We have the Egypt, we have Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe, we have the Stonehenge and all that stuff. But you see, the Egyptians are no longer worshipping the rock, right? They're not worshipping the ancient Egyptian gods, right? They've all become Muslims. The people in Greece are no longer worshipping Thor and Hercules, right? They've all become superheroes. They've all become Christians. All Greeks and Europeans have become Christians. But India is the only place where we have 1 billion pagans still worshiping these gods. So we have the continuity. So we not only have the statues and the temples, but we also do the rituals and we also believe these gods. So you can, if you guys come here to India, you not only get to see the structures, but you also have an opportunity to understand the mindset of why they built it, what they're doing.
Yeah, one of the other things from Lapakshi Temple, which really blew my mind, it was your video that got me to go there, was not just the giant bull statue, which is a whole amazing story in its own right, but it's the giant footprint that's carved into the temple grounds itself. Now, you know, from a distance, it kind of looks like an actual footprint of a giant. It's like, what, 2 feet long? It's pretty big, but you can see it's been carved out. I remember you saying, and you said you interviewed someone locally, that actually, originally, that was a footprint of an actual giant going back thousands of years to a different Yuga cycle. And this is actually part of the tradition of that area. Can we just talk about that for a second?
Yeah, I went to the Lapakshi Temple probably 2016 or 17, and I made a video about this on YouTube. It's still there. And I've actually put what the local tour guide says, and he'll say this is the footprint of an ancient human being, right? And then after that, because it kept fading, they had to carve, they had to retrace that. We don't know for sure if that's true or not, but see, Hinduism believes that humans 10,000 years ago were giants. They were kind of very tall. They were 10 foot, 15 foot tall humans. And we spoke to Randall Carson about this yesterday, and he was saying the same thing. He believes that, the giant mound builders of America and the Nephilim stories and how Hindus believe that ancient humans were much taller actually may be a part of history, right? Humans or some subspecies of humans could have been much taller, right? And this is probably true, and what they had was a real footprint there. And then it's, because of and this is the beauty of India, because if you had something there,
Hey, babe.
we renovate that. We don't
How are you,
let
gorgeous?
that fade away. So if it's slowly fading away, if there's
I'm doing great,
carving,
baby.
and if it's slowly fading away,
How's your
we
evening
renovate
going?
that. We try to preserve that. And it's very interesting because what's happening in Indonesia today
Good, sweetheart.
is that if you go to Java Island,
Okay, you call me.
we have a lot of Hindu temples, amazing temples, and Indonesians are very nice people. They try to preserve
What's that, baby?
the Hindu temples. I'm not blaming them, but
It was good. It was great, gorgeous. It was
87%
great.
of
How about you? How's
Indonesians
your
are
day?
Muslims. So it's like a Muslim majority country, and they're not allowed
That's good.
to carve figures. So they cannot recreate that. They're not allowed to carve figures. It's prohibited in Islam. So they kind of like, their hands are tied. So slowly these statues and these carvings are fading away. But in India, we preserve that, right? In India, they say, okay, so this footprint is fading away. So they carve that. But what happens is, in the last 20, 50 years, people also argue, oh no, this is new. They just carved this. This is not real. They just carved this. But that's a possibility too, and we have to acknowledge that. Maybe somebody did carve this new, but we have evidence that 100 years ago, they had the same giant footprint, so they've been doing this. And we have giant footprints, not only in Lapakshi, we have at least a dozen giant footprints all over India and Sri Lanka.
Okay, that's pretty impressive. Also, all over India and Sri Lanka, you have dolmens, these megalithic structures that are kind of found worldwide. I mean, this is something that a lot of people don't realize, that there's certain styles of megaliths that are found not just in Britain, not just in Europe, but dolmens are found in North America, they're found in South America, they're all over the world, they're Africa, India, Australia, anywhere you can think, you know,
Yes.
Korea. And I visited some, I think the Hiram Benkel dolmens, not far from Hampi.
Yep.
And they were really interesting because I know you've been there, you've been to other ones in South India as well, but there's some examples of like, they're really thinly cut, they're like slices of granite.
Yes.
They make the dolmens with. And up on the hill, there's a half-sliced boulder, like it's been lasered.
Yeah.
I mean, what do you make of these? I mean, because these are supposed to be, what, 5,000 years old? Something
At
like
least,
that?
at least,
Yeah.
yes. So if we look at history, right, like today's history starts from yesterday, because today it's just news, right? Yesterday, the history starts and it goes back to like 3,200 years. But dolmens, cairns, stone circles, they're prehistoric monuments, right? Because we don't have any written record of why they were created. And you are absolutely right. Dolmens and cairns are the only structures which are universal, right? Because in the UK you'll have other structures like this, you know, like the Stonehenge. In Egypt you'll have pyramids. And you're absolutely right? Because dolmens, all these prehistoric structures, like the stick figures and cave paintings, the dolmens, everything prehistoric is pretty much universal, right? There's no difference. I really love this part because after the historic period, we can say, okay, so this belongs to Hinduism or Southeast Asia and India. And we can look at pyramids of Egypt and say, okay, so these kind of structures belong here. But when we go back in time beyond the historic period, the dolmens are everywhere, right? They're everywhere. And yeah, I did go to the Hiradenical site probably 8 years ago, I think. A very interesting site, very interesting dolmens, and you're absolutely right. They did something to the stones, and they look very thin. And it's way up the hill, and nobody goes there. They had bears at that time, were they?
There were apparently bears around, so yeah, we were looking out for them.
Yeah.
For
So
sure.
very interesting site.
Yeah, and I just love the fact that they kind of they look like they're lasered the granite. I mean, you know, where we come to India, we're going to talk about this in a moment, about the technology there, but to see them on these dolmens as well, it looks like they're somehow
There we go.
precisely cutting dead flat, really hard crystalline granite. And that really impressed me. One of the other things I noticed was many of them have holes, like a porthole, in the entrance to the dolmen itself. And some of them are very tall, they're like houses. And they're supposed to be, aren't they supposed to be the houses of the dwarfs? That's what the tradition states, even though some of them are giant size. So you have this dwarf tradition and giants also in India, which I think is really, really interesting. So you just find all these different elements you find in other countries existent in India as well. Just on a side note, before we start talking about some of the technology, the high technology we see in India, when I was there, I visited, I went further north, and I went to some cart ruts, which are called Krishna's chariot tracks. That was way up north. It was before you went to Bodh Gaya. It was kind of that general area around there, and I couldn't believe it. These cart ruts, one set of cart ruts, moving at an angle across this carved out of basalt line, not limestone. Again, these are universal. These are in Malta. These are in the Azores, even in Texas. They're all over the world, and so I'm just blown away to find little anomalies like that, you know. But they're applied to the ancient kind of Vedic texts, and they talk about this is the area where Krishna went through in his chariot, and it was so hot it burnt them, and it has a whole story associated with it. You don't really get that in other cultures because the traditions have been lost. But I find that fascinating. I mean, what do you make of anomalies like that in India?
Yeah, because there's not a single site, I don't think, that's not related to the gods. Because Krishna's butterball is like a huge, round rock. It's huge. This is in Mahabalipuram. This is called Krishna's butterball. It's related to Krishna. And the bridge between Sri Lanka and India, this is called Rama's bridge or Ram Setu, They just attributed that to Lord Rama. And this is very common in India. And same thing with your Kartraks, just associated with Lord Krishna.
Yeah.
Extremely common. Like, and we've seen Shiva's musical instrument. We've seen, Vishnu's helicopter type of stuff. And now we don't know how these names came about. We can also assume that people were just naming them after gods, but possibly there was some connection between the gods and these things. For example, the Rama's bridge. In the ancient text of Ramayana, they say that Rama literally builds a bridge between India and Sri Lanka. It's detailed in like great, it's greatly detailed. How long it is and how they built it and all that stuff. So there may be some truth to it, and eventually we may find out.
Yeah, I just find it fascinating. I mean, the richness of India, it really blew me away because spending 3 weeks there, not long enough clearly, but first time I've been there, and I did a huge amount of research over the years and the build up to visiting there, and it just was like, I landed there and it was like going into a dream state. The whole time I was there, I felt really comfortable, like I was supposed to be here, like I kind of felt I knew what I was doing there. It was a very
So
strange
laggy.
kind of feeling about the place. Like, felt right at home. It felt really easy.
I wonder if changing the weapons made it laggy.
Some friends in Bangalore, and it just all worked out. I think there's something kind of magical about where traditions are maintained, and there's like what John Michel, megalithomaniac, original megalithomaniac, he had this whole thing about the enchantment of the landscape in Britain. This is where all the stone circles were geometric, placed all around the country, creating this harmony, and like it would affect your consciousness. And you go to India and it feels like that is happening, and it's still alive. It's never broken. It's always been there. And then you, with your research into the extreme precision, the geometry, the mathematics within these sites, and also, I believe the placement of them across the country, it's the same principles. And so, do you feel like when you visit other places, it's quite different feeling, compared to when you've got this living tradition in India?
Yeah, we definitely, every place has a vibe to it, whether we like to believe that or not.
Yeah.
That's just a fact. Every person comes with a vibe. There's no doubt about this. And when we're younger, we spend all our, we try our best, trying not to accept that. We say, oh, no, there's no energy to a site, there's no energy to a person. But as we become older, we definitely understand that, a place or a thing or even an animal, it's a fact that some dogs are, very friendly, and some dogs can become very irritable. There are some dogs even, so there are vibes to every site, and it's very interesting because when you start to receive that vibe, you can understand that the builders designed the structures with a certain vibe. Okay, so in India, this is common knowledge in India. If you're Hindu, for example, let's say you're suffering from depression, you're always depressed. They would ask you to go to a certain temple for 48 days. Yeah. So if you had, for example, if you had stomachache, or if your arm was always paining, they would ask you to go to a different temple. If a couple did not, they could not, have a baby, they would tell them to go to a series of temples. And because in our tradition, we understand that the temples were built with a certain vibe. Okay, so the temples were built with a purpose in mind. And we don't fully understand that, right? Because now we tend to think that, okay, so it's a temple, it's a place of worship. This will be your idea, right? So when you go to another church, you'll be like, you're not going there to, this is my assumption, you're not going there to gain knowledge about physics. You just go to a church to worship God. Nothing wrong with that, right? Or if you go to a mosque, you go there to communicate with God. There's nothing wrong with that. But in a Hindu temple, it becomes completely different, right? Because you don't need a lot of these dancing carvings in a place of worship. You don't need a sundial, right? A clock in a place of worship. You don't need all these carvings of animals giving birth in a place of worship. You don't need that. So the temples were built both as a library, like it's like a Wikipedia. You take a child there. The child can learn a lot of things. The child usually comes back and tells you, oh, do elephants give milk to their babies? Right? I don't know, do they?
I don't know.
Exactly, you don't know, but they do.
Yeah, okay.
But
okay.
a child who visits an ancient Hindu temple I've seen it with my own eyes.
What's that one?
Went up to the father and said,
What's that piece? That's got to be at least 54.
Two baby elephants drink milk from their mothers, right? Because it's carved there. It's carved there. You don't even because we're adults, right? We probably don't get the chance to see that. But the child gets that knowledge. It's like watching Animal Planet.
So it's almost like these are kind of knowledge buildings as well. These are like kind of almost like they're there to kind of teach. They're there to kind of give information. So this is incidentally very interesting because I believe that's the same case at Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe in southeast Turkey. These nearly 12,000-year-old sites, because the carvings there, they're all in a kind of circle. It's almost like there's a route, like a sort of circuit you do. You pick up different information at different times of the year as you go around the different months. And I feel like it's a similar thing, perhaps, what you're saying. It's like a memory space. Mm-hmm. It's like the way that
Yo, what's up, Eric?
knowledge is passed on.
Thanks, man.
Use that as the kind of tool, like the blackboard with the chalk on it.
Do you know this? Have you seen the emulator new strat?
Intriguing. Another connection, I believe, there is with Göbekli Tepe.
How about that line? You like that line?
Something you've been researching a lot is the Shiva lingams. Now, these are really
Thanks, brother. How are you, man?
This is one of the. I went to many sites. Some
Oh,
of you
shit.
to look at some and kind of work out what was going on here, because at Karahan.
No, we have not. Yeah, brother.
It's also JJ.
So check this out. You see that? How he went straight to the
almost like a lingam
to the fucking door there,
pit in the structure,
where you skip the button press.
where it has these 10 upright.
It's pretty insane.
A solid bedrock with a serpentine one, and also a head coming out the side.
I haven't really gotten any fast doors though.
Like a lot of us
Had a pretty
it's
fast
like
run.
Like a Shiva lingam. It's got the water in it. It's got the channels coming out of it. It's got the phallic symbolism and everything else. Possibly Shiva or a god coming over, overseeing it. It's got serpents on his neck.
Like onslaught.
Doesn't Shiva have serpents around?
Yes, Shiva does have serpents around.
So it's a very similar
On
idea.
YouTube.
And so, and with
Yeah, I don't think it.
earlier research,
People are saying it's only
connection,
emulator only, but I mean, I don't know.
great culture.
I don't know what that means.
Can you give us a bit of background on the Shiva lingam and about why it's important?
And Grow Meek.
Sites?
Okay,
Shout
so
out Grow Meek, man.
the-
So Grow Meek. So they just got like, they've been getting like, damn Agent 50 on emulator.
Statue. All of Hinduism, they're still discussing it. They're still going to discuss that 1,000 years from now. There's no doubt, right? Now, according to mainstream,
So what they do apparently is
traditional
they
archaeology,
load the guard early, the
lingam
gate
is
guard like
a
super early.
phallic symbol. Okay, it's a
Apparently,
symbol
I don't know.
of,
Might be wrong.
masculine energy, if you want to put it that way. And they're also saying that the yoni, the base,
So this is what you do. You look up here at the second light.
feminine.
You go here to the second last light down around that block.
In
I was slow
some
there. I
places,
should have
for
followed the
example,
black
some parts of
line.
Indonesia and in newer temples.
I don't think it's gonna
When I
work.
say newer temples in India, that means
The way
500
Onslaught
years
does
old.
it is, and
Okay,
Gromik
that's new
is.
in India.
See, that was a little bit
We can
faster. It
see
wasn't
that
that
some
fast. So
people
I'm fucking
kind
up the
of
weapon switch.
Adapted, like they've adopted that phallic symbolism.
He's probably like 54
onto
pace.
the lingam. They've made it look like a human phallus. Okay, but in ancient times, in ancient Hinduism,
Maybe.
you almost never see that. You don't look at a lingam and says, okay, it looks like a male
Oh,
body
too
part.
wide.
It's not intuitively understandable because
I think I tried to correct it. Everything is probably 55.
By the way,
Nice,
I
nice.
don't think it's like
Thanks,
a
brother.
phallic symbol, by the way. I think it's
So you see like a 54 with
mysterious
that strat? They just
symbol,
randomly, that's like,
and it's also
you know?
considered a source of
Bro,
energy,
like,
right?
how bad
And
was
of
that
course,
gate?
it
And
gets
like no
very
boosts?
intertwined,
Can you
right?
imagine?
Because when we say it's a source of energy, when
Good
we
one,
say
thanks, brother.
it has the power to give life, people tend to go back to the phallic symbol, and this is very common.
But can you
amongst
imagine,
humans,
like,
right?
in
Very common
we
amongst
figure
humans
out this
because it's like-
gate and it
this is
becomes
funny
amazing?
because, if you send an emoji of an eggplant or a brinjal to somebody, that's suggestive. Okay, because they're immediately thinking about the male body part, right? If somebody sends you another fruit, they may think it's
Like
like
that.
a
Oh, I
female
got the back
body.
boost though.
That's how people talk.
You see that black line in the ceiling? I know you're just in here
Jeff
for a minute.
Bezos
I hear you, brother.
launched
Thanks,
his
man. I
first
appreciate it.
rocket. Do you remember that rocket? Like the internet went nuts because
If I ever
it
just
looked
go off
like
rambling,
a male body part. They were
you never
kind
have
of-
any obligation to
they were
reply. I
pixelating
know.
that the internet was. He made a great achievement.
I appreciate
he was
it, man.
sending a private rocket, you know, to space, and people were talking about how it looks similar to a phallus, because this is how humans think. Okay? So this is common, and so my point is, I don't think the lingam actually means a phallic symbol. I don't think that's what it means, but it also means a source of energy. And it gets very much interesting in ancient
That was okay,
Indian
that was pretty good.
temples. It becomes very interesting because the main chamber in an ancient temple is called Garbhagriha. Okay, so where is the lingam and the
Oh, it's
yoni
pretty
located?
fast. It's maybe
It's located
54.
usually in the main chamber,
Definitely
the sanctum
54.
sanctorum of an ancient
Oh my
temple.
gosh, come on, let's
And
go.
what's that main chamber
Can we
called?
clutch
It's
it?
called the Garbhagriha. Now, what's the Garbhagriha?
Oh, we can't.
Like, it means the uterus or the womb chamber of a woman. So that's a traditional name that we know that name has been used for more than 2,000 years. So there's some connection there, but we also don't fully understand that. Now, what's really interesting to me is not only that we don't fully understand the lingam, but this lingam also exists everywhere, right? This symbol of just a cylinder, right? It just exists everywhere. It exists in Stonehenge, right? Well, what's that called? What do you guys call that lingam in Stonehenge?
Yeah, you get some of the bluestones, some of the spotted dolerite look like phallic lingam. That's what they look like. I mean, it's very, very profound. I mean, in fact, all the bluestones have that look about them originally when they were probably there.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, so people say that just megaliths.
But there's
the
one
same.
big one. There's one big, what's that stone? I forgot the name of it. There's one big lingam where the shadow falls.
Oh, yes, okay. Now, there's a couple there actually. There's one of the bluestones, which has got like a kind of ridge down one side of it, standing upright. You've got another massive fallen stone with all the scoop marks on it, which look like it's been softened and scooped. And it's got like a separate, almost like top part. This is what gives it this look of this sort of male phallus. You know, it's kind of. So, I mean, Terence Meaden has even suggested that Stonehenge is a series of lingams, and the shadows at certain times, the solstices, etc., would then penetrate, the shadow would then penetrate the male shaft into the female yoni, the kind of trilithon, the entrance between the trilithon. So there's all this play of fertility between the male and the female. So I see that at Karahan Tepe as well, but it seems to be that could be a similar thing, you know, reflected in the traditions of the lingam in India.
Do you, now that's really interesting to me because the lingam is also found in Ireland or Scotland. There's one phallic symbol in Scotland or Ireland. I wanted to go there, but I had to get a separate visa.
It's the Hill of Tara. Yeah, I think it's the Stone of Destiny. And I think that's a lingam, that's like a lingam on top of the kind of main sacred, almost like almost like a palace area of the kings and queens of Tara, going way back to the Bronze Age and Neolithic times. Then you start getting into all the traditions linked with that. It's pretty epic, just like it is in India. Yeah.
So what is your opinion here? Like, you think the once upon a time, this is my idea, that once upon a time, people worship the same gods.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. I mean, I think, but the symbolism is something JJ focuses on. The symbolism is being found in so many different places. And I think just to find something like the pillar shrine or structure AB at Kalahan Tepe, and it seems to have the same symbolism, not exactly the same design, the same symbolism. And I find that fascinating because, you know, to find that in these different areas, especially with the connection that B.G. Siddharth made between the head from the Vali Churi, an 8,300 BC site in Turkey, with the serpent going down the back like a Vedic priest Mahoni. And he believed the Rig Veda, the astronomy in that, was based upon stuff from Turkey. It was based upon the same era as the Göbekli Tepe sky watches and things like that. So yeah, I think there's something going on. I think there's a kind of natural, religious kind of drive people have, and it's always related to fertility, whether it be male symbolism or female symbolism. You know, there are lots of these goddess cults and cultures all around the world. There's little goddess statues we find in Malta, and the Paleolithic ones as well.
Yeah.
So I think there's a drive in less advanced societies, especially for this kind of thing, because you're relying on fertility in the land, in your animals, in your crops, for survival, as well as yourselves. So yeah, I think there's something to be said. So I think this lingam is like a long process of kind of development that ended up in certain places, into certain forms. And yeah, it fascinates me. Yeah, there's something about it which, you know, seeing these lingams myself when I went to India and was with you to see some of them, they blew my mind, because there again, this is a living tradition. There was stuff, paint placed all over them, and flowers and oils, and fires were still going, charcoals, and you just realise this is amazing, because like we said earlier, these traditions are alive. So I think, you know, the fact that it's still revered is really interesting.
Yes. It appears to be, to some it appears to be exotic. Obviously, people think, oh, if you're an atheist, it's like, oh, it's a lot of superstition, appears to be exotic. Sometimes people get frustrated because sometimes it gets really busy in temples. You'll have like thousands of people just swarming the place, right? But what we also understand, and it takes time to embrace it, what we do understand is that people start to become very peaceful and happy when they visit these ancient temples, and that's a fact, right? So you can go there. And this is what's happening now, because we're having like a renaissance in India, right? You could be filled with, you know, your work pressure. You could be depressed. You could be unhappy with your life. You could have personal problems. But if you go to an ancient temple, or if you go to a series of ancient temples, you're doing pilgrimage, basically. And the people who are starting to do pilgrimage come back as different persons. You know, they completely changes their lives. For some reason, it has a therapeutic effect on humans.
I agree, yeah, and same can be said, I believe, for the stone circles of Britain. I mean, there's a huge amount of research on the acoustics, the geometry, the placement. It's all like to enhance consciousness, enhance the soul. It's like the John Michel idea of the enchantment of the landscape, the enchantment of the human and the landscape combined. I think that's absolutely fascinating. I think another aspect of that, which I want to talk about, is the precision geometry and the stonework. The absolute, you do a lot about ancient technology in India. I think that's part of it. I think it's part of all the same thing. It comes down to precision, polished kind of stones and designs with specific shapes and everything like this. But what do you make of how they could have created such precision? I mean, I've seen like Kailasa Temple. I went to Barabar Caves, and that blew me away. I mean, the walls are so smooth, they're like mirrors. It was really, really
What? Really?
strange.
It's out already?
This is all over
Really?
this kind of technology. And back then, 1,000, 2,000 years ago, it
Wow,
wasn't
look
supposed
at
to
that.
be anything that could create that kind of precision. So what are your thoughts on that in a general sense? And if there's a couple of sites we can discuss, that'd be fascinating.
I've obviously documented a lot of sites. We've documented at least a few hundred temples, I would say, but definitely more than 100 temples. We do see extraordinary precision, right? And we're not only talking about astronomical precision. For example, there's a place called the Modara Sun Temple in Gujarat. The alignment is just perfect. So the sun, so this is a fun part. Maybe some of your viewers may really like this. On a particular day, I don't remember if it's the solstice or the equinox, but on one of those days, if you go to that temple,
Oh,
your
it's so
shadow
shitty.
will not fall on the ground. Yes. Now it sounds like absolute superstition or pseudoscience, but you can literally go there on either the solstice or the equinox. I think it's the solstice, or it could be the equinox. But if you go to Modara Sun Temple, and if you stand there on that day around noontime, your shadow will not fall on the ground. And of course, it's mind-boggling, right? Because it's dedicated to the sun, and to ancient people, they're going to go there on that day because it's a solar event, right? People worship those days, and then when they go to the temple, their shadow will not fall. What ancient builders did was they built it on the Tropic of Cancer. So they built it exactly. They look. In fact, it's so precisely done. There's a tiny little notch carved, and that's where the Surya is placed. That's where the Surya, the sun god, is placed exactly on the Tropic of Cancer. Okay, so they knew what they were doing. So we're talking about astronomical work there, but you were asking me more about the stonework, right?
Yes, as well as, there's so many anomalies, but
Yes.
but the precision stonework, we've seen like the work of people like Christopher Dunn, Ben Van Kerkhove, looking at the Egyptian high technology. We've seen it in Peru, potentially, elements of it coming out of Göbekli Tepe now, but clearly one of the most amazing places for this is India,
Yes.
by far.
So we can see some amazing stonework in ancient temples. Okay, so we can tell that the ancient builders were putting details, were deliberately doing this to kind of create a lasting impression on mankind. They knew that people would come after 1,000 years, 2,000 years, and they would marvel at them. Right, so they made a change. There was literally in multiple temples. This is happening in Hampi. This is in many temples in Tamil Nadu. You will see a chain hanging from the ceiling, but this chain is made of stone. So they made these stone chains. People still don't believe that. An average visitor who walks in refuses to believe that all these links, it looks very empty and even kind of moves, and when there's a strong breeze, it moves. And then they refuse to believe that it's not made of metal. It's carved out of stone. Okay? So we can see that things like these stone chains in ancient temples, and they knew that they would last for a long time. Imagine making a chain out of solid granite. Okay, this is really mind-boggling.
It's like one piece of granite we're talking about.
Yes.
So it's not like they're putting it together in different pieces. It's like one piece.
Yeah.
It's insane.
Now think about it, right? So because you work with megaliths, right? You think about stones all the time, right? So you work with megaliths, right? So you think about stone all the time. So you're ceiling like this, and there's a stone chain hanging from that, right? correct? And then the chain links. That's what we're talking about. So you're saying that the chain is not made of different stones. It's made of one stone, and they kind of carved all the insides out, right, to make it look like the chain. That's what you're saying, and it's hanging from big block there. But how is it connected to the big block on top? How is it?
Yeah, that's pretty confusing, isn't it?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Because now we're not only talking about the chain, we're not talking about this block here, we're talking about this block. Because you can't take two stone blocks and then put them together. We can do that with metal because we can open it up and put it back in.
So terrible.
Right? So we're not only talking about the vertical stone chain, we're
Slow.
also talking about the horizontal piece. And sometimes the horizontal piece is like 20 feet long and 10 feet wide. It's like the one big block of ceiling. So how did ancient builders do that?
So we have these bizarre kind of stone chains. I've seen many beautiful carvings throughout India. You talked a lot, we'll put some links in some of the videos about the high technology. There's so many examples. I went to Kailasa Temple, and that really blew my mind. That's further up north, it's an amazing site. Kailasa Temple is one of these multiple kind of cave sites. It's Ellora, isn't it? Ellora Caves, yeah. And that really blew my mind because I saw your video on it, of course. And it's carved out of one giant chunk of granite, of basalt. It's incredible. So this, I don't think people realise. I didn't realise how big it was. When I went there, I spent virtually the whole day on it because it just like blew my mind. These 27 other temples I didn't get a chance to look at really, but that one, and it's much bigger than you think. There's like obelisks there, there's like elephants, there's carvings. Where did all the stone go? You estimated there was like 400,000 tons of stone vanished from that. And where did it go? How did it disappear? Because I know, I don't want to give too much away. You mentioned in this video they had some kind of ancient technology that's recorded in texts. So tell us about this amazing site.
Yeah, one of the very first things that
This is it. This is the run.
is the Kailasa Temple. I think this was in 2014 on YouTube. This is 10 years ago.
No.
And I realized that it became viral at that time. That was the very first video that became viral at that time because I did kind of a thorough research. I made a bunch of videos about the Kailasa Temple. At that time, Kailasa Temple was already famous, but it hadn't gotten the worldwide fame that it now has. But it deserves more fame, in my opinion. We already have like Hillary Clinton coming and looking at the Kailasa Temple. Yeah, we got the Kailasa Temple everywhere now, right? People doing pilgrimage to Kailasa Temple. This is amazing. Right?
That's a better
Not only,
line.
like staunch Hindus
That was a
doing
better line.
pilgrimage to Kailasa Temple. We also have people like ancient aliens people, the Megalithomania people. All these people are coming to Kailasa Temple to study the Kailasa Temple, right? Because it truly deserves that attention. And I'm saying it deserves more attention, right? In 10 years, it should get more people because it's a world wonder, right? That's what it is.
Oh, that was an insane gate.
Kind of wonders of the world.
Yes.
After seeing it up close, I was just, wow, this is
No.
something special.
Yes.
It's okay still.
Because the way that the temple
okay.
is carved is
It's
unique.
fine.
Okay. Because in Ellora Caves, we
It's
have
fine. That was pretty shit. The ending was really shit.
Some are Buddhist caves, some are Hindu caves, some are Jain
Oh, I might have ruined it. The run
caves.
might have been a 53 if the ending was perfect. Maybe. I don't know. I don't think so.
Okay, let's get this
I don't think it's fast
giant
enough.
rock and now start to make a temple out of it. You would start from the ground level. You go like this. This is called cut-in technology. Okay, so that's how most of the cave temples are built. But Kailasa Temple started from the top of the mountain. That's what makes it so unique. It started from the top because there's no way you can start like this. So they started from the top and they did a cut-out technology. And it's very hard to believe that they can do that. So why? Because the Kailasa temple is not a simple cave temple. It has a lot of different things inside it. It has multiple chambers, it has multiple levels, it has floors, it has carvings, it has a lingam. When people go to Kailasa temple, when they go to a main chamber, they're worshipping a lingam. But that lingam is not put there. The rocks around the lingam were carved out, right? So the lingam was already there. So all these spaces that people walk around looking at the carvings, that was filled with rocks once upon a time. That was solid mountain that you're walking on now. It's actually unbelievable how they did that, right? And then understand this, till today, right? They're saying, the Kailasa temple, they theorize it's 1200 years old, probably much, much older. Probably much, much older, right? But let's say it's only 1,000 years old, let's say it's only 1,300 years old, whatever. Till date, nothing has been added to the temple. And you can see it's a finished temple. People try to destroy it, like the pyramids. It's still there. How do you destroy a mountain? You have to nuke it. Okay? Now there are bridges. Okay, there's like one chamber, like there's like a second level chamber here, right? Like second floor here, there's like a balcony here, and between those two floors there's a bridge, right? There's like a walkway. And you can walk through it. And you have to completely understand everything, and you have to plan everything, put it on paper, completely mastermind that before you start carving anything, before you start scooping out just a little bit of rock. You have to plan everything out. And when you go to Kailasa temple, you realize how complex it is, man. I'll give you some styrofoam, right? I'll give you just a little block of styrofoam, and I'll dare you to carve something that looks even close to a Kailasa temple. So we're looking at like some insane design, planning, execution, with no mistake. Let's say they screwed up just one part, right? Let's say they damaged the bridge, right?
Oh, that
let's say
might
they
be
broke the structure,
53.
They scooped it out.
That
and
might
then
be
they
a
say,
53. I don't think I got any boosts though.
They can't do it. You know what I'm saying? So,
Oh
like a
man.
masterpiece. And
It's a
this is
Fastgate
why,
54.
It should be declared as a world wonder. Just because it's in India, it doesn't get that much attention. That's a fact. Okay, if it were in the UK, for example, or if it were in the US, I mean, no offense, we look at mounds, it's just a pile of dirt somehow, right? And they're well protected. You get signboards on it. People respect that. People come from various states just to look at the mounds, right? But simply because the Kailasa temple is in India, it doesn't get that much attention, but it deserves like the whole world should come and look at the Kailasa temple at least once.
I agree. But what happened to the 400,000 tons of stone that got removed? That's one of the big mysteries.
Yes. We don't know exactly what happened, and I say that you could literally build a pyramid with that excavated rocks, right? All the rocks that got scooped out, you can build a pyramid. You can build a Giza pyramid with the excavated rocks, and it's gone. It's not there, right? So we don't know, and of course, we may never find out. We may find out it's there somewhere, but if you look at ancient texts, it talks about a lot of different tools and weapons and technology that we don't understand. For example, there's one called Bhaumastra. They talk about Bhaumastra, not Brahmastra. Brahmastra is like a nuclear weapon, but they talk about Bhaumastra, in which you can put a tool into the earth and it literally evaporates the rock. It just converts a rock. It just vaporizes the rock.
This is like recorded in some kind of ancient text
Yes.
in India.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah, it literally talks about how the weapon or the tool, it literally talks about how the tool will go into the ground and find a rock and just vaporizes it. And the Bowmaster, you know how they were using the Bowmaster? They kind of used like a metal detector, right? And they would try to find gold, and they would evaporate the rock, and they would go to the gold. Yeah, it talks about technology like that. So we don't know if this type of technology existed at that time.
It's fascinating. I mean, that reminds me of some of the Irish stories that we get from ancient Ireland, where they talk about having these high-level weapons and tools that could do such things. You know, like they could create massive destruction, but also be really useful for like constructing sites. So I find that fascinating that we have these kind of such ancient stories, almost like of a whole different world that's been completely forgotten. So it's amazing to hear all this from you. It's a delight to talk to you. It was brilliant to spend some time with you in India as well. Hopefully I'll be coming back. We had you over in England briefly as well, Stonehenge and Avebury recently, so that was quite epic in its own right. And we hope you're going to come
Oh
back
my
again,
god.
and we're going to be talking about you coming over and actually coming on a small tour with us, which would be amazing.
Boost me,
So I want to thank
please.
you for joining me. Thank you for all the work you do. It's really serious amount of research. And everyone who's listening here, please check out Praveen's YouTube channel, his website and everything else. His videos exceptional. His research is really kind of high-level intellectual level. He gets invited to universities in India to share his research.
Oh, that might be it.
That's the kind of
No
level
boosts
from
again
that.
though.
So it's been
This is the
brilliant.
fastest gate
Thank you,
ever
Praveen, so
though.
much for joining us at Megalithomania.
Thank you, Hugh. I really
55?
appreciate you having
What?
me, you know,
I must have
we have these
grinded at
discussions
the
here,
on the end.
I do look forward to coming to UK.
Fast gate.
I know you have this Megalithomania event, and I also know that you do the tours. So I think you've invited me, but I hope we can
Alright.
do one together. It'll be fantastic.
55.
Yeah, thank you.
Or I was slow at the start because the gate must have been normal. But the start must have been really slow. Can't remember what happened. I wonder if I tapped down on my 2x controller by accident and lost some speed. It might have happened. I don't think so. No. Maybe that back boost is worse than I think it is. It's probably the back boost. Whoops.
In the year 1625, An Italian nobleman named Pietro della Valle went on a tour of the Middle East. Della Valle was a prolific traveller. He journeyed around Asia, North Africa, and even India. He married an Assyrian Christian princess in Damascus, and now the two of them travelled together, journeying by horseback and camel, accompanied by local guides. At this time, travel in this region couldn't have been more dangerous. The Ottoman and Persian empires were at war, fighting over who would rule in Baghdad. And meanwhile, local bandits took advantage of the chaos to prey on travellers. In those days, lions even roamed in these hills. Due to these various dangers, Della Valle's guides were constantly on edge. It was June the 18th, 1625, when they spotted a distant group of tribesmen on the horizon. Their guides decided that they might be in danger and began to search for a place to hide. In the distance, they spotted the looming mass of a series of enormous ruins, as Della Valle later wrote in his memoirs.
Being suspicious of some Arabian vagrants or vagabonds, for more security we removed a mile further and took up our station under a little hill near some ruins of buildings, which we saw from far away.
Della Valle's group stayed in those ruins for several nights, while their guides negotiated with the local ruler, asking for safe passage. During the day, under the baking Iraqi sun, Della Valle passed his time by walking among those monumental ruins.
Oh, the boost.
Our removal hence being still deferred, I went in the forenoon to take a more diligent view of the ruins of the above said ancient building. What it had been, I could not understand, but I had found it to have been built with very good bricks, most of which were stamped with certain unknown letters which appeared very ancient. I observed that they had been cemented together not with lime, but with bitumen or pitch.
Della Valle was fascinated by the broken fragments of writing that littered the ground of this ruined place. He explored further and wrote down some of the symbols that he saw again and again, stamped into the stones and pieces of clay brick.
Surveying the ruins again, I found on the ground some pieces of black marble, hard and fine, engraven with the same letters as the bricks, which seemed to me to be a kind of seal. Amongst other symbols which I discovered in that short time, two I found in many places. One was like a pyramid, and the other resembled a star of 8 points.
Della Valle and his wife didn't know it, but they had stumbled across the ruins of Ur, a city that had formed the centre of one of mankind's first civilizations. This society was known as Sumer, and it was where so much of the world we know today first began. Eventually, negotiations with the local leader fell apart, and Della Valle's guides no longer felt safe camped out there in the ruins. They departed in the dead of night and fled to safety across the desert. In Della Valle's bags were a few of the clay tablets that he had found scattered around the ruins of Ur. These would be the first examples ever seen in Europe of a language that had been dead and forgotten for thousands of years. All the way home, Della Valle must have turned those tablets over in his hands, gazed at their mysterious ancient symbols.
I don't think I can get 53 without a boost.
Who had built those
Even 2
enormous
boosts,
mounds
like...
of brick and earth, all alone out there in the middle of the desert? What did the symbols on those broken pieces of clay mean? And if such a great city had once stood there, what in all the world could have happened to it? My name's Paul Cooper, and you're listening to the Fall of Civilizations podcast. Each episode, I look at a civilization of the past that rose to glory and then collapsed into the ashes of history. I want to ask, what did they have in common? What led to their fall? And what did it feel like to be a person alive at the time, who witnessed the end of their world? In this episode, I want to go back to the very beginning and look at a society that is one of the candidates for the first ever technological human civilization. These are the people of Sumer, who we call the Sumerians. I want to show how, over the course of millennia, the Sumerians would build a society that would form the blueprint for all that followed after. I want to show how they rose to invent writing, mathematics and the wheel, and built the largest cities that humanity had ever seen. And I want to explore what happened to cause their final and devastating collapse. In the highlands of southeastern Turkey, a range of snow-topped limestone peaks rise over 3,000 meters above the flat plains beneath. These are the
I might
tallest
try for another
mountains.
15 minutes max,
The
and then
mountains of Turkey
I'm gonna
rise so
maybe
sharp
try another
that
level
rain
for
clouds find
PB or
it
something like
difficult to
Surface
pass
200
over.
or something.
Instead, these clouds pool in their hollows and valleys and give these hills an exceptionally high rate of annual rainfall. In spring and summer, the warm air means that the clouds are even denser, and violent thunderstorms rock these mountains too, echoing off the stones of the valleys. As a result, this is a landscape shaped by water. The steep sides of the Taurus Mountains have been eroded to form streams and waterfalls, while underground rivers have cut into the rock and hollowed out some of the largest caves in Asia. Just as it has shaped the rocks, water has also shaped the beliefs of this region's people. The name of these mountains, Taurus, comes from the Latin word for bull, and the reason for this isn't hard to see. Temples have been unearthed all across these mountains, decorated with terracotta statues of bulls. Since ancient times, the people who lived here worshipped the storm god Teshub. They believed he rode on the back of a bull, perhaps because the sound of the thunderstorms reminded them of the thumping of enormous hooves. Accompanied with the cracking and booming of these thunderstorms,
Why was that 4 in a
these
row?
heavy spring rains drain
I think that was
into
4 in a row,
streams
boys.
and join rivers already flowing down from the snowy mountain passes of Armenia. Soon, these small rivers join together and flow down from the mountains and out onto the wide, flat plains beneath in two great majestic watercourses that run together in near parallel for nearly 2,000 kilometers. The vast floodplain of these rivers is today the land we call Iraq. In Arabic, this area is called Bilad al-Rafidin, the land of the two rivers. And in the West, it has been known since ancient times by its Greek name, combining the words Mesos, or middle, and Potamos, or river. Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers. These two great waterways are known as the Tigris and the Euphrates. For millennia, these rivers have brought life down into the flat floodplain of Iraq, and the source of that life comes from some of the most lifeless things, the rocks of the mountains themselves. Virtually all rocks are held together with tiny flecks of two different materials, called quartz and feldspar. Quartz is a clear, glittering crystal formed from oxygen and silicon, while feldspar is a complex mineral derived from silicon. Together, they make up over 60% of the Earth's crust. And when rivers cut their routes through the mountain gullies and underground streams, their waters wash over the rocks and dissolve their soluble parts. But quartz and feldspar don't dissolve in water, and so these tiny crystals are carried along by the river in a cloud of glittering particles. We call this substance silt. Silt is sometimes known by the more poetic name rock flour, and its particles are smaller than a grain of sand. But these tiny specks can have an enormous impact. Soil with a high silt content tends to hold water better and promotes air circulation. And for this reason, silty soil forms the perfect habitat for most plants.
I did not know
The
that.
Tigris and Euphrates transport vast amounts of silt down into the lowlands of Iraq every year. And as a consequence, this flat stretch of otherwise arid desert has become exceptionally fertile. For the history of this region, and the history of all humanity, these tiny particles would prove immensely significant. Other than its rich clay soil, the desert plains of southern Iraq are an inhospitable landscape. In fact, this is perhaps the last place you might expect the first human civilizations to arise. For one thing, the climate of this region is extremely hot and dry. Summer temperatures can reach over 52 degrees centigrade, or 126 degrees Fahrenheit. And rainfall is rare, especially in summer. Coupled with the strong winds that blow across these plains, this means that the soil is arid and windswept. And although the seasonal flooding of the rivers brings life to the earth, these floods are also unpredictable. In Egypt, the River Nile flows directly from the Great Lakes of Africa, which act as a stabilizing and regulating force. But the Tigris and Euphrates depend on the amount of rain that fell on the mountains of Turkey, Armenia and Kurdistan, a quantity that varies greatly from year to year. Years of drought can often be followed by years of devastating floods. And during winter, the whole plain is covered with a thick layer of mud. The region of southern Iraq is also poor in natural resources. The land is essentially nothing but a floodplain made of clay and silt. There are no metals to be mined here, and virtually no stone. And because of all these challenges, it took early humans a long time to reach this hostile environment. In the far prehistoric, archaic humans like Homo erectus vied for survival in the upper reaches of the rivers. Archaeologists have found stone axes and other artifacts dating back to nearly 500,000 years ago. But the riverlands of southern Iraq weren't suitable for this hunter-gatherer lifestyle. But about 13,000 years ago, things began to change. The first nomadic hunter-gatherers began to settle down in permanent villages. These early innovators had noticed something interesting. They saw that when they threw away the discarded seeds of edible plants, that same plant would later sprout out of their rubbish dumps. And this gave them an idea. They realized that if you buried plant seeds in the earth, fed them and watered them, more of the same plants would grow. These were some of the first farmers, and once they found a good patch of land, they quite understandably didn't want to move. They soon built houses nearby, and storehouses to keep food through the winter. They banded together into larger communities in order to divide the labor of farming, and to protect their grain should anyone else try to take it. They learned how to take the clay from the ground and shape it into pots.
I think it's 54.
They were
No
still
boosts
limited
again.
to areas
Fast
where the
gate.
rains were plentiful, to the mountains and the foothills. From about the year 6500 BC, these human settlements began to spread. Century by century, millennium by millennium, they worked their way down the courses of the two great rivers and into the inhospitable land of southern Iraq. Who these people were, what language they spoke, and what they called themselves, we have no idea. Today, we call this stretch of several thousand years the Ubayyad period, named quite arbitrarily after the site where their first artifacts were found. As the Ubayyad people moved down the rivers of Iraq, they began to notice other things too. They noticed that date palms grew in some areas of the river, providing them with a rich and delicious source of calories. They soon found out that these too could be cultivated and planted in orchards. And they also noticed that these palms could provide shade for other more fragile plants, allowing them to be grown too beneath the harsh Iraqi sun. And they made another crucial discovery too. They realized that they didn't have to grow their plants only on the banks of the river. With a bit of hard work, they could dig channels that diverted the life-giving water inland. Now they could grow crops just about anywhere, so long as you could dig a canal long enough. And the people of this region would soon become very good at digging canals. Worked properly in this manner, this landscape could be immensely productive. In their fields, the people here grew wheat, millet and sesame, and in gardens beneath the shade of their date palms, they also grew pomegranates, grapes and figs, as well as chickpeas, lentils, leeks, garlic, cucumbers and watercress. But there was one noticeable patch of green in the midst of all this desert. In the south of Iraq, the rivers Tigris and Euphrates branched into deltas and shallow lakes before they meet the ocean, creating an ancient marsh landscape. Here, dense thickets of reeds grow, so tall you can't see over the tops of them, populated with buffalo, wild boar, and marshland birds. Since ancient times, the people here have built their houses out
What?
of
How? What did I
reeds,
get stuck? Like what?
binding them together into incredibly
come
strong
on, man.
beams of up to a meter thick, and building large, vaulted houses out of nothing but reeds. And it's in this marshy southern landscape that the greatest Sumerian cities rose. Just as Mesopotamia was watered by two great rivers, its lands were also populated by two great peoples. These were the people of Sumer and the people of Akkad. Over the course of their history, the Sumerians and the Akkadians grew together in such a symbiotic way that it's impossible to tell the story of one without the other. We know a decent amount about the Akkadian people in the north. They spoke a language in the Semitic family, meaning that it's in the same language family as the Aramaic of the Bible, and later Hebrew and Arabic. This language seems to have been indigenous to the region, and it shares grammar and words with many other languages that surrounded it. But the Sumerian people are much more mysterious. In fact, they are such a mystery that they have caused archaeologists to refer to what's called the Sumerian problem. Sumerians spoke what we call a language isolate. That is, it has no relation to any of the languages around it, and it's essentially in a language family all of its own. Sumerian was so alien to the region that early scholars who discovered its
Look at
first
that.
texts didn't believe it could be a real language at all. They thought it must have been a kind of code used to communicate in secret. This alone has led some historians to ask whether the Sumerians may have arrived in southern Iraq from somewhere else. The Sumerian culture centered on the sea coast of Iraq's far south, and so some have suggested that they may have arrived by boat. Some backing for this theory may come in the writings of Roman historian Flavius Josephus, who wrote down a Babylonian legend that he heard in the 1st century AD. It relates the story of a half-man, half-fish called Oannes, who walked out of the sea and taught the people of Mesopotamia the secrets of culture.
He brought them the knowledge of letters, sciences, and all kinds of techniques. He also taught them how to found cities, build temples, create laws and measure plots of land. He revealed to them how to work the land and gather fruits.
After teaching mankind all these secrets, Oannes leaps back into the sea and swims away. It's possible that in this myth, ancient storytellers have preserved some memory of the arrival of the Sumerians, landing en masse by boat, and bringing with them their advanced urban culture. Some have even argued that the Sumerians may have come from as far afield as India. And more evidence for the migration theory seems to come from the words that the Sumerians used for their professions. For more common jobs, the ones that involved manual labor, the Sumerians used old, pre-Sumerian words. Meanwhile, they brought new words with them to describe more sophisticated and urban occupations. For instance, the words for scribe and winemaker are both distinctly Sumerian. But others have proposed a more interesting theory, which does seem to solve some of these contradictions. Although it does seem a little far-fetched, I think it is worth mentioning here. The clue to this theory comes, once again, from mythology. The Sumerian version of history was dominated by a devastating event of apocalyptic proportions. And if you were brought up reading Bible stories, you may find it familiar. The Sumerians believed that in a time long before, in the time of their most distant ancestors, a great flood had washed over the world. This same story would later pass on into the legends of the Babylonian Empire, and from there to the Hebrew poets who wrote the first books of the Bible. For this reason, the story of the flood is perhaps the oldest continuously told story, and it's in this legend that the clue to the origin of the Sumerians might lie. The story of the flood is so striking that many historians with varying degrees of credibility have tried to come up with some historical event that may have inspired it. And history is actually full of great inundations. When the last ice age ended around 10,000 BC, global temperatures rose between 4 to 7 degrees over a period of about 5,000 years. Up until that point, vast ice sheets had covered the land in the north of the planet, reaching as far south as Berlin. But as temperatures rose, these ice caps melted, and their water poured back into the oceans. Global sea levels rose an average of 2.5 centimeters a year, until by the end, the sea had risen an incredible 120 meters, or enough to completely swallow a 30-story building. Around the world, the sea engulfed vast regions of the coast. The land bridge that had once connected Russia and Alaska was
I think
submerged,
I'm giving up
separating
trying this
Asia
time,
and the
at least
Americas
tonight.
forever. Low-lying regions of what is now Europe's North Sea flooded,
Yeah.
turning Great Britain into an island. And in
I'm
the
gonna
Middle East,
play on, I
the
don't know,
effects
S200
were felt
or
just
something.
as dramatically.
Have a 147 PB.
During the low sea levels of the Ice Age, the Tigris and Euphrates had flowed
I'm gonna
for a
take a little
further
break. Be right back.
600 kilometers, joining into a single river and meandering along a stretch of low-lying valley wedged between what is now Iran and Saudi Arabia. This grand river would have met the Indian Ocean around the region of Dubai today. Some historians have argued that Neolithic humans may have made their home in this fertile valley, having journeyed down from the mountains of Iran. But as the glaciers melted, the sea advanced, slowly at first, but with an increasing speed. Over the next 5,000 years, the coastline would have moved an average rate of 120 meters a year. That's over a kilometer every 10 years, or 1 meter every 3 days. If there were humans living in this low-lying region at the time, this event must have been utterly terrifying. The next centuries would see these people driven north by the encroaching waves, which swallowed whole forests and villages. These people would have been pressed into ever denser populations, forced to adapt as they went. They would have been a roving band of refugees, never able to settle
Oh,
anywhere
thank
for
God,
long
it's
before the
back.
sea made its next advance. This exodus would have continued until the planet's temperature stabilized and the seacoast reached its furthest point, right around the year 5000 BC, just at the time that Sumerian culture as we know it burst onto the historical stage. So this is a theory that I think deserves some consideration. That as the waves of Semitic-speaking farmers moved down the rivers from the mountains to the north, they met another population coming up from the south, a ravaged and devastated people, speaking a language that had evolved independently, and telling tales of a flood that had drowned the whole world. This theory could be supported by that legend of the amphibious fishman Oannes. Is it possible that the Sumerians came to southern Iraq not by boat, but actually walking out of a land that was now at the bottom of the sea? Another legend, called the myth of Enki and Ninhursag, relates a creation story in which the god Enki creates man in a land called Dilmun. Like the Garden of Eden, Dilmun is an earthly paradise.
In Dilmun, the crow does not utter its cry. The lion does not kill. The wolf does not seize the lamb. The wild dog, devourer of kids, is unknown.
Dilmun is thought to have been what is now Bahrain, an island in the middle of the Persian Gulf, that body of water that was once a fertile river valley. All we have on this subject is speculation, and until any further evidence is found, this will remain just a theory. But as a storyteller, I can't help but be drawn to this colourful explanation. When we try to work out the truth of what happened in this incredibly distant past, we are reminded that history is not a rigid set of dates and facts, but a continuing process of inquiry and debate. It can sometimes feel like mapping the surface of a planet in another solar system, or like exploring the dark depths of the deep sea. And all we have to work with are the small spots of light that history provides. We may never know the truth about where the Sumerians came from, but there is plenty that we do know. The Sumerians referred to themselves as Uksag Giga, or the black-headed people. and the Akkadians called them Salmat Akkadi, which meant the same thing in their own language. From carvings that depict Sumerians, we can see how they wore their hair, curly on top and cut short on the sides. Common men wore sheepskin kilts, while the richer people would have worn coloured fabrics spun from wool, decorated with tassels and beads. Among the wealthy, both men and women wore jewellery, anklets, bracelets, necklaces and ear ornaments, made of copper and sometimes gold. Remarkably, we also have a great deal of evidence about Sumerian music. Like everything else, the Sumerians wrote their music down on clay tablets. And we've also discovered other texts that explain how to play it, including how to tune the instruments. And so today, we're able to hear the sounds of the music that once played in the temples and courtyards of cities like Eridu, Ur and Uruk. These two great peoples, the Semitic Akkadians and the Sumerians, formed a symbiosis over the next centuries that would see their cultures run in parallel, just like their two great rivers. They shared their successes and advances. They shared the cities that were even now growing to become the largest ever seen. But they also shared their failures. And as a result, their fates became inextricably intertwined. The Sumerians believed that the world was a roughly circular landmass, surrounded on all sides by a huge body of water. They believed that another ocean also lay above their heads, held in place by the solid structure of the sky, which occasionally let some of this water through as rain. They divided water into two types, that of the rain and rivers, sweet water, and that of the sea, bitter water. Sumerians called their homeland Ki Engir, which means the land of the noble lords. To describe the settled societies of the Sumerians and Akkadians, they used the word kalam, meaning civilized, while they used the word kur to describe the mountainous zones bordering the plains. Kur in the Sumerian language meant mountain, but it also came to mean rebellious, barbarous, and wild. And at this time, that's how the outside world must have looked to them. To their south and west, the vast desert of Arabia yawned, a rolling sea of sand dunes where nothing grew, home to fierce nomadic tribes. To the north, the rocky Taurus mountains of Turkey and Kurdistan hemmed them in, full of hardy mountain people, while the Zagros mountains of Iran formed the edge of their world to the east. Today, the Arabic word for the region of Upper Mesopotamia still holds within it a sense of this feeling of isolation. They call it El Jazira, meaning the island. But despite the challenges of their landscape, the Sumerians flourished. They had no stone to build with, so instead they learned to make bricks from the river mud, mixing them with straw, gravel, and broken pottery, and baking them. With clay, they made everything from pots and plates to sickles and writing tablets. They had no wood, so instead they harvested vast numbers of reeds, tying them together into bundles and plaiting them together into mats. The Sumerians invented or adopted the pottery wheel, the wagon wheel, the plough, and the sailboat. Their buildings used complex arches and domes. They worked out how to cast metals, such as copper and later bronze. And the Sumerians were also avid mathematicians. They developed complex systems of measurement, as well as methods for dividing, multiplying, and calculating angles, even writing down the first ever multiplication tables on clay tablets. We actually use Sumerian mathematics every day. It was the Sumerians who divided time into the minutes and seconds we still use. And since their number system worked on a base of 60, rather than our system of 10, that's why we have 60 minutes in an hour. The reason for using 60 as the base of a number system is actually quite simple, and it's rooted in the design of our bodies. If you hold your hand out in front of you right now, you'll notice that each of your 4 fingers is divided into 3 segments. It's thought that ancient people would use the thumb of their right hand to tap each segment of the finger, counting up to 12. When they reached 12, they would raise a finger on their left hand, counting up the 12s. And when you had 5 fingers raised on your left hand, you had 60, and you had to start again. The fact that there were 12 cycles of the moon in each year would have confirmed for the Sumerians that this was the number system intended by the gods. The 360 degrees we still use in angle measurement is another relic of this system. Due to this spark of ingenuity, Sumerian society grew at a slow but steady pace. They dug vast networks of irrigation canals that extended the agricultural zone around the rivers and also allowed them to transport goods in canal boats. They built dams to regulate the flow of the rivers and ensure that the spring floods came in a more controlled way. In fact, the Sumerian language has a vast array of words to describe the different kinds of canals, reservoirs, dams and lock gates required to control their water. Gradually, the landscape of southern Iraq transformed from dusty salt flats and marshy swamps to a green patchwork of farmland. Many historians have argued that it was the digging of these canals and watercourses that originally led to the greater social organization we see during the Sumerian period. These extensive systems of water management needed careful planning, engineering expertise, and mathematical calculations. Work teams needed to be organized and paid in food and beer. Foremen and overseers needed to be appointed. And all of this led to a kind of early bureaucracy that gave rise to the first true states. In the 1930s, historian Arnold Toynbee famously argued that it was just these environmental challenges in southern Iraq that created the conditions in which civilization could be created.
The desiccation of the region impelled the fathers of the Sumeric civilization to come to grips with the jungle swamp of the lower valley of the Tigris and Euphrates and to transform it. The ordeal through which the fathers of the Sumeric civilization passed is commemorated in Sumeric legend. The slaying of the dragon Tiamat by the god Marduk and the creation of the world out of her mortal remains signifies the subjugation of the primeval wilderness and the creation of the land by the canalization of the waters and the draining of the soil.
The tough semi-desert landscape created what he called a stimulus and response effect in these early people. Toynbee argues that in conditions that are too comfortable, people have little need of increased social organization or technological development. And in conditions that are too harsh, society finds it impossible to develop. He argues that it's in environments such as southern Iraq, where the challenges are numerous but not overwhelming, that a cradle of civilization can occur. According to Sumerian texts, the first city in the region was the city of Eridu. One controversial document known as the Sumerian King List describes Eridu as the place where the god Enki first decided that a king should rule.
When kingship from heaven was lowered, the kingship was in Eridu. In Eridu, Alulim became king. He ruled for 28,800 years. Alangar ruled for 36,000 years.
For obvious reasons, many historians have questioned the reliability of this source. Some have even gone so far as to call it a piece of utter fiction, or a later piece of propaganda, designed to legitimize a usurper to the throne. But the king list does tell us how the Sumerians, of at least one point, thought of their history. And many have argued that Eridu may well have been the world's first city. Eridu was founded around the year 5400 BC. That's nearly 7.5 millennia ago. At this time, populations of woolly mammoths, survivors of the end of the Ice Age, still roamed in remote parts of the world. Eridu was populated by Sumerian speakers, and soon it would make up just one of a whole constellation of small cities that dotted the landscape of southern Iraq. These independent city-states were centered around their temples and ruled by priest kings known as the Ensi. Records show that these Ensi were often assisted by a council of elders, which included both men and women. Most of the largest cities in this period were probably no bigger than about 10,000 people. The borders of these city-states were defined by the courses of canals and specially created boundary stones, carved monuments left jutting out of the earth to mark the line between one territory and another. Slowly, these cities began to eclipse the old Ubaid culture that had preceded them. Art and architecture began to take on the form that we would truly call Sumerian, and technology also began to take huge leaps forward. This first period seems to have been a time of relative peace. There's little evidence of organized warfare or the keeping of professional soldiers in these early cities. Most towns during this period went without walls. One exceptionally ancient Sumerian myth, called the Gifts of Inanna, seems to capture some of the spirit of this period of transition. It describes technology and the refinements of civilization being handed down by Enki, the king of the gods, to his daughter, the goddess Inanna. She later passes them down to the people of Sumer.
Holy Inanna received the craft of the carpenter, the craft of the coppersmith, the craft of the scribe, the craft of the smith, the craft of the leather worker, the craft of the builder, the craft of the reed worker. Holy Inanna received wisdom, the shepherd's hut, the knowledge to pile up glowing charcoals, the sheepfold.
Enki teaches Inanna about family, the proper laws of inheritance, and the art of good judgment. But he also goes on to give her other gifts, some of which show that the darker side of civilization was already beginning to make itself known.
Holy Inanna received deceit and the rebel lands. Holy Inanna received heroism, power, wickedness, the plundering of cities, and the making of lamentations.
It may be that the ancient Sumerians already recognized, right at the dawn of settled human society, what the scholar Walter Benjamin would one day write, that there is no record of civilization that is not at the same time a record of barbarism. And it's true that during this period, the Sumerians began practices that would begin a sorrowful phase of human history. Among them is the use of slave labor. They captured men and women from the hill countries outside their borders and used their labor to fuel the growth of their own economy. In the last episode, I used the metaphor of the death of stars to talk about the life cycle that empires often pass through. But we might also think about the birth of civilizations in this way. The first stars were born from gas clouds, compacted together under the weight of their own gravity, into a spinning ball of matter. Under enough pressure, the temperature of the star's core increased, and finally, nuclear fusion began. The first stars burst into light. When enough people gather together in one place, that settlement obtains a kind of gravity. It draws other people towards it, and as the size of the settlement increases, so does pressure on its various systems. In some cases, this pressure results in those people being fused together into more complex forms of organization. Sometime around the year 3200 BC, the first stars of these human settlements began to burst into light, and that light was the invention of writing. One Sumerian epic poem, called Enmarkar and the Lord of Arata, gives the first known story about the invention of writing. This poem attributes the invention to a king who has to send so many messages that his messenger can't remember them all.
Because the messenger's mouth was heavy and he couldn't repeat the message, the Lord of Kalaba patted some clay and put words on it like a tablet. Until then, there had been no putting words on clay.
The Sumerians had two things around them in virtually limitless abundance. That's the clay beneath their feet and the reeds that grew in the marshes and along the banks of the rivers. And it's these two resources that combined to form the first human writing. Sumerian scribes would pick up a lump of clay big enough to fit in their hand. In fact, about the size of a modern smartphone. They would take a piece of reed, cut into the shape of a wedge, and print it over and over into the clay to form symbols. The distinctive wedge shapes of the reeds give this form of writing its name. We call it cuneiform. The oldest cuneiform clay tablets come from the city of Uruk and date to the late 4th millennium, probably around the 32nd or 31st centuries. This script originally consisted of pictographs, small pictures designed to depict objects so everyone could understand what they represented. These were first used to keep track of everyday things like rations and supplies, and on some of these very early tablets, you can still see very clearly what they mean. A bowl of food is depicted with an eating mouth next to 6 impressions, and a sheaf of wheat next to 5. This indicates that a worker can exchange this tablet for 6 bowls of food and 5 sheaths of wheat. Scribes would have had to work fast, copying
We're reading Colin Bolt's.
throughout their day, and slowly
is that
this
Alchemass?
pressure meant that the signs had to become simpler and more abstract. Before long, they no longer
So
looked
reading
like the
Colin
objects
Bolt's.
they described.
There's a level of PD
After the year
pass?
3000,
What? Let's watch that.
the
That'll
number
be
of
the end of the
symbols
stream.
was reduced
That's cool.
from around 1500 to about 600. And someone else had the bright idea that each symbol
That's gonna be the
stand
ender.
for a certain sound instead of a whole idea. This was the beginning